Nyajong, and great afternoon to all of you. I'm trying to make this work. I think Tane Soldier, the dangerous one, may have busted this. Before I give my remarks, I want to thank Dean Shorts, the faculty and staff, all of you parents who are here today, and the graduating class of the Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs for this wonderful homecoming. A wonderful opportunity for me to address everyone here today and to really be back in Minnesota among family. Thank you so much. As the dean said, I was born in a thatch roof bamboo hut in a small jungle village in northern Laos, where there was no electricity or running water. My personal journey from the mountains of war-torn Laos to a refugee camp in Thailand, to the halls of the Minnesota State Senate, and now the steps of our nation's capital is an improbable story that can happen only in America. While much of my own memory of my family's journey to the United States has been recreated from years of retelling by my parents, the moments of recollection for me are not only dark and painful, but also significant in shaping my worldview and my life experience. Now, I don't recall much of the details, but I do remember walking for days and days by foot, arriving in the middle of the night at a riverbank that was the border between fear of persecution and death and fear of life and the unknown. I remember getting in a very small rowboat and getting off a very wet, slippery, and muddy riverbank. I have flashbacks, those long, hot nights, struggling to fall asleep inside the airless, makeshift army tents, fighting for space among the restless mass of bodies twisting and turning under the cover of mosquito nets. I'm sure some of them were trying to find relief from the sticky humidity of the night, but others were seeking refuge, however briefly, from the nightmares that must haunt them even in their sleep. I remember that my mom was pregnant at the time and then gave birth to my sister in the temporary refugee compound that the Thai military, with the assistance of the supervision of the United Nations, has set up for us. I can vividly relive the image of my mother wrapping my baby sister in a single surgical scrub shirt that my father had brought back from the refugee health center where he was working as a nursing assistant. Before our escape out of Laos, my father was a USAID trained medic during the Secret War in Laos, a clandestine CIE operation established to stop the flow of weapons and soldiers from North Vietnam into the South. I remember standing in line for every meal, and I recall that the food didn't taste like anything I'd ever seen or eaten before. But I ate it anyways, because I didn't know what the next meal was going to look like or when it would come again. I also remember how good it was to finally eat a bowl of white rice in water while sparingly licking a cube of sugar. I was 7 years old at the time. Coming to the United States as a political refugee, growing up Hmong American in the Midwest, and now working as a national advocate for social and civil rights in our nation's capital, sometimes I feel as if I have literally traveled through a warp of space and time, seemingly at random. Yet at the same time, I find myself in awe of the destiny that I am so fortunate to manifest. I would like to believe that perhaps it's the wondrous work of the spirits of the ancestors that has made this happen. Those early days of our refugee resettlement experiences was really, really tough for those of us who were part of the largest wave of Asians who came to this country in the late 70s and 80s. And yet we thrive despite the overt racism and bigotry that we encountered. You know, compared to so many of our relatives who perished along our flight to freedom. We had survived, and we were given the chance to live. And in the deepest parts of my soul, I always knew that I owe it to all of those who didn't or couldn't make it to take full advantage of every opportunities that came my way in this great country. Most importantly, like many of you, I have struggled to make sure that my parents know in their lifetime that their quest to bring us to safety was not in vain. In the late 1970s, when our family came to the United States, we moved to a very small city where we became some of the first Asian American faces to ever live in that community. And with the Vietnam War as their only point of reference, many of our Anglo-American neighbors saw us as surrogates for America's enemies in Southeast Asia. And we would often get called chink or gook, and would often endure showers of spit or trash as we walked to school. I recall one event in particular that still has the power to anger me even today. It was a beautiful summer day, and my mother and I were sitting in front of our big bay window. She was trying to teach me how to do traditional Hmong embroidery. When out of the corner of my eye, I saw 3 young men riding by on their bicycles. And as they drew near, one of them threw a handful of eggs at the window. And as the eggs were streaking down the window, one of them came back in the other direction and threw another handful of eggs on the other side of the window. And though I was shocked, I wanted to see these boys closer. So I went up to the window, and as I was trying to identify them, the third boy came up our lawn on his bicycle, looked me in the eyes, and spat at the window. And as the 3 of them rode away, and as the eggs were streaking down the sides of the window, and the spit was running down the center of the window, I became so angry and enraged. I went to our closet and I took out my 3 aluminum T-ball bats. I put the bats by the door, and I went to my parents and I asked them what they were going to do about the situation, for I was prepared to take some action. While my father told me to just ignore them, in fact, he said, "You're only 5 feet tall, 90 pounds, you'll just end up in the hospital." My mother said some things to me that provided a direction for my life and gave me a greater reason to make something of myself. My mom said, "These people don't know who we are or where we came from or even what kind of people we are. All they see is our skin color and the fact that we are different from them." She said, "In life and in the reality of living the rest of our lives in America, no matter how American we become, we will never be able to change the shape of our eyes, the texture of our hair, and the color of our skin. And someone somewhere will never like you because of the way you look." Then she said, "This is why you must study hard, you must finish high school, and you go to college, and you come back, and you be their boss." She said, "In your lifetime, many people will never like you because of the way you look, but some people will have to respect you because of who you are." So, as disrespected and as violated as I felt, I did not resort to violence, and my mother's words gave me strength and direction. And I graduated from high school, and indeed I went to college. And as a first-year student at Brown University, I discovered for the first time words and vocabularies that spoke to my negative experiences. Words that articulated and gave voice to that heavy, silent weight in the pit of my stomach. I became an activist and embarked on a personal journey to find my political identity as a refugee, as Asian, and woman of color living in America. I tasted and tested the principles of diversity, racism, and pluralism. And my newfound understanding of these principles liberated me, gave me a political voice, and helped to shape me into the political person that I am today. I will always be grateful for the many supportive professors at the Taubman Center at Brown University who did a fairly good job of liberalizing this refugee kid from the Midwest and turned her from an organic chemistry failing, biology major wannabe into a campus protesting, public policy changing, university hall occupying radical. Now, one of these individuals is in fact with us today. Dr. Edith Barrett, whose son is a member of this graduating class, was my professor. And thanks to Professor Barrett and others at the Public Policy Center, I did go on to the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas to further focus on poverty policy, and eventually ended up here at home at the University of Minnesota Law School. It really was this homecoming that gave me the opportunities to work for local political candidates, engage in issue campaigns, and work to register new American voters that led to political organizing and running for the Minnesota State Senate. I'm often asked, what made me run for public office? And while I would love to be able to say that I was pushed by outraged or inspired by righteous issue anger, it wouldn't be true. I was inspired to run out of a deep sense of gratitude and awareness of how lucky I was to be living in this great country. In my efforts to register new Americans to vote, I saw that they were struggling to connect to our democratic process in an intentional and meaningful way. A struggle that is magnified by the failure of mainstream candidates and political parties to prioritize and civilly engage these often neglected and invisible voting blocs. And in fact, I decided to run precisely because I didn't think that I would win. So there was no risk in the face of a grand opportunity to energize and to bring new Americans and disenfranchised voices to the political process. All my life, I could never tell which was the worst burden to overcome, being a political refugee or being poor. What I did know, however, was that in either situation, I was too often living under someone else's rule. I think my decision to concentrate on public policy, to attain a law degree, and to work to change public policy, whether as a legislator or now working in Washington, D.C., really stems from a deep dissatisfaction with living by other people's rules, and a deep belief that I could make a better difference if I had a place at the rule-making table. When I first ran for office, a woman came up to me and told me she was glad I was running for office. She said, if you don't make room for yourself at the table, you will end up on the menu. So when I was in the Senate, and sometimes even today as we fight against the erosion of our civil rights, protect immigrant rights and voting rights, I often think about her and how important it is to fight for a place at the table. I have learned that when good, thoughtful, passionate, and skilled public policy graduates like us are at the table, we always ask the questions about the unintended consequences of public policies, the costs and benefits to the affected communities, especially those who are underrepresented and most vulnerable. And we always ask about the impact to the disempowerment or the injustices to those who are voiceless. I've seen that while there are many smart people who can identify and analyze the problems, it takes a depth and breadth of diverse experiences to craft solutions that do not leave out an entire category of peoples or disadvantaged, nor render them completely invisible. On the night that I got elected, I was so struck with emotion that I couldn't deliver my victory speech. And while most people told me to stop crying and to start acting like a leader, My grandmother slowly walked up to me and she put her hand on my head, as only elders are allowed to do, and she spoke softly into my ears. And she told me to take as much time as I needed to gather myself. Then she said, when you are ready, you go up to the microphone and you speak. And today and every day from this day forward, when you speak loudly and you speak clearly, especially when you feel that ball of tears gathering in your throat. For those tears represents the hundreds and thousands of souls who have never been heard. Today, your voice is no longer yours. Whenever you get to speak, you are giving voice to those who are agitating to be heard. We live in interesting times. By your presence here today, you've embarked on a leadership journey at a time when the voices of the future, our children, our youth, as so capably demonstrated by the Black Lives Matter movement, are hungry and impatient for partnerships to co-create the best possible future for all of us. And it is demanding that we start by addressing the long-standing inequities that continue to strangle some of us. By your presence here today, you have accepted the leadership mantle to envision, redesign, and reinvest in the most basic and fundamental institutions that are necessary for the economic growth and vitality of our collective future. The fact is, this nation will reach a demographic tipping point in 2044. And there will be a need for leaders who are prepared to harness this opportunity. One challenge, according to my friend Manuel Pastor, is to address what he calls the racial generation gap, or the phenomenon where the older, whiter population do not see themselves reflected in the younger, browner population, thereby resulting in disinvestments in basic infrastructures like K-12 education. In a recent conversation with the N.E. Casey Foundation, he suggests that we need to change that by changing the narrative and helping the older generation see itself more in the younger generation. And part of that is recognizing that the future workers, the producers of the future, the folks who are going to be chipping into Social Security and Medicare and keeping those systems solvent, it's this younger cohort of color which is both coming into working age and moving into prime working age. Unless we're making the investments to make sure that that younger generation is productive and not over-incarcerated, it's working at full speed and not threatened by deportation, we're not going to be able to have a thriving American economy moving forward. Finally, your arrival at this ceremony today demonstrates that you are willing to entertain how we govern in a world where we may already be obsolete. And while we're still debating, our children are already living a future reality. So let me tell you a quick story to illustrate. In my family, we like to play board games. You live in Minnesota, with all the blizzards, you learn to play board games. One of these games is a game called Life. Now, you may recall that in that game of life, as you travel through the paths of life, you spin the wheel of fate, and it will dictate where you land. Sometimes you are dealt with a certain set of cards, which carries with it peril or fortune. And with this game comes a defined set of rules, which dictate specific paths about future, career, marriage, having children, and so on. So last winter, my 9-year-old daughter wanted to play. So we decided to reacquaint ourselves with the rules of the game and began to play. Halfway through the game, she grabs the Post-it pad and began scribbling notes. When I asked her what she was doing, she proceeded to tell me that she was dissatisfied with the rules. And she wanted to propose just a few amendments. I said to her, well, what would you like to do? And she said, well, if you land in a space that says you have to get married, you do not have to get married, but you will have to pay a single person penalty to the bank. She says if you do choose to get married, you should be allowed to marry a boy or a girl of the same gender. Because after all, the law of this country protects that right. If you land in a space that says you have to have a child and you are a girl, you can pay a penalty and don't have to add a child because, well, it is your right to choose. If you, however, land in this space and you are single or a single gender couple and you want a child, you can have one because you can adopt. And finally, she said, Mom, at any time throughout this game, if you choose to get a divorce, you can, but you must keep all your kids. Kids today live in a reality that is different from what we have seen or have been seeing. We need to wake up and catch up, or we will be left behind. If my 9-year-old child can assert her sense of rights to amend the rules in the game of life, it feels a little bit absurd that these realities are still being debated as we speak. So as you leave today, I commit to you my grandmother's wish. With your credentials and your knowledge and your life experiences, you are eminently qualified and will be positioned to be a voice for the voiceless. You will have many opportunities to speak. And so when you do speak, you speak loudly and clearly because you are giving voice to the countless souls who are agitating to be heard. And in your worst moments and toughest times, I hope that you will let my mother's advice and my grandmother's words and my daughter's story to give you inspiration and direction. Because, well, they have given me strength and guidance. So congratulations.